In a remote village, a dog guards a grave. Its tireless devotion sparks everyone's curiosity. Until one day, intrigued, a woman decides to investigate. The dog's loyalty unveiled buried secrets that would change the fate of the community. The sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Mrs. Ethel crossed the rusty gates of Oakville Municipal Cemetery. With her slow and careful steps, she followed the familiar path, carrying a small bouquet of daisies picked from her own garden. The morning dew still covered the tombstones, reflecting the first golden rays of the day. As she walked among the graves, Mrs. Ethel noticed something unusual. A medium-sized dog with brown fur and amber eyes was lying on one of the tombstones. The animal seemed motionless, almost as if it were part of the tomb itself. Intrigued, the old lady approached slowly. "Oh, little one, what are you doing there?" she whispered, extending her wrinkled hand towards the dog. The animal raised its head, its eyes meeting Mrs. Ethel's. There was something in that gaze, a mixture of sadness and determination, that made the old lady take a step back. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl, just stayed there, firm in its position on the tombstone. Mrs. Ethel frowned, adjusting her glasses to read the inscription on the stone. "In memory of John Smith, beloved son and brother." The date indicated that the death had occurred just 3 months ago. "Poor thing, it must be his dog," she thought out loud, feeling a pang of compassion. Determined to help the animal, Mrs. Ethel went back home and returned with a bowl of water and some food. She placed them near the tomb, but the dog didn't even look at the offering. Its eyes remained fixed, as if guarding a secret that only it knew. In the days that followed, the presence of the dog in the cemetery became the main topic of conversation at Tony's Diner, the meeting point for Oakville residents. Theories multiplied. Some said the animal was waiting for its owner to return. Others suggested it could see the spirit of the deceased. Dorothy, the town's official gossip, wasted no time in spreading her own conjectures. "I heard that this John Smith wasn't a saint," she whispered to anyone who would listen. "Maybe the dog is guarding something important." Dorothy's words planted a seed of curiosity in the residents. Soon, small groups began to visit the cemetery, no longer to pay homage to loved ones, but to observe the mysterious four-legged guardian. It was during one of these visits that Lisa, a young veterinary student, decided to take action. Unlike the others, she was concerned about the animal's well-being. "We can't leave him here indefinitely," she argued with the cemetery caretaker, Mr. Johnson. "He needs care, a home." Mr. Johnson scratched his bald head, thoughtful. "Yeah, miss, but no one can get near him. I've tried everything, even brought hot dogs, but nothing makes him leave there." Lisa wasn't discouraged. With patience and determination, she began visiting the cemetery every day, always at the same time. She would sit at a respectful distance from the tomb and talk to the dog, her soft voice echoing among the tombstones. "Hi, friend," she would say. "I know you're sad, but you don't have to be alone. There's a whole world out there waiting for you." Days passed without any apparent change. The dog remained at its post, impassive. But Lisa noticed small signs. Sometimes the animal's ears would move when she spoke, or its eyes would follow her when she got up to leave. Meanwhile, the story of the faithful dog spread beyond the limits of Oakville. Journalists from neighboring towns began to appear, cameras in hand, eager to capture images of the cemetery guardian, as the animal came to be known. The media attention brought with it a wave of curious and well-meaning people. People came from far away, bringing treats and toys for the dog, but it remained indifferent to all attempts at approach. It was on a rainy Sunday afternoon that something finally changed. Lisa arrived at the cemetery soaked, her determination unwavering despite the storm. As she approached the tomb, she noticed that the dog was shivering, its wet fur clinging to its thin body. "Oh, my dear," she murmured, her heart tight. "You can't stay like this." On impulse, Lisa took off her coat and, slowly, very slowly, approached the animal. To her surprise, and Mr. Johnson's, who was watching from afar, the dog didn't back away. It allowed Lisa to cover it with the coat, its amber eyes fixed on hers. At that moment, something changed. A silent connection formed between the young woman and the animal. Lisa sat down next to it, shielding it from the rain with her body. And there they stayed, united in a silence that said more than 1,000 words. As news of this first successful approach spread, the atmosphere in Oakville changed. Curiosity gave way to a collective determination. to help the cemetery guardian and perhaps unravel the mystery behind its unwavering loyalty. But no one could predict the secrets that this simple act of compassion would begin to unearth. Secrets that were buried much deeper than any grave in that cemetery, and that would forever change the history of Oakville. The news of Lisa's approach to the cemetery guardian spread through Oakville like wildfire. The next day, a small crowd gathered at the cemetery gates, eager to see if the miracle would repeat itself. Among them were familiar faces and some not so familiar. Lisa arrived early, carrying a bag with veterinary supplies. Her heart was pounding, mixing anxiety and hope. As she approached John Smith's grave, she saw that the dog was still there, wrapped in the coat she had left the day before. "Good morning, friend," she called softly. The animal raised its head, its eyes meeting hers. There was recognition there, a spark of newly formed trust. Slowly, Lisa approached, offering a piece of cooked chicken. To the amazement of all present, the dog sniffed the offering and, after a moment of hesitation, accepted the food. A murmur of admiration ran through the crowd. Dorothy, always ready for a comment, couldn't contain herself. "Look at that, the young lady did it. Who would have thought it would take an outsider to solve our mystery?" Dorothy's words, though not ill-intentioned, caused a palpable discomfort among the older residents. Lisa, despite having lived in Oakville for 2 years, was still considered an outsider by many. As Lisa carefully examined the dog, checking for signs of dehydration or injuries, Mr. Johnson approached, scratching his bald head. "Miss," he began hesitantly, "now that the little fella's calmer, maybe it's time to, well, you know, get him out of here." Lisa looked at the caretaker, then at the dog, which now rested its head on her lap. "I don't know, Mr. Johnson. I feel there's something more here. He's not just sad, he's protecting something." Lisa's words seemed to echo strangely in the silence of the cemetery. Some of those present exchanged nervous glances, as if a collective secret was about to come to light. It was at this moment that a figure stood out from the crowd. It was Mrs. Thompson, the retired librarian, known for her sharp memory and even sharper tongue. "John Smith," she began, her voice trembling with emotion or perhaps fear, "wasn't the saint everyone thought. There were rumors, stories." Before Mrs. Thompson could continue, she was interrupted by a shrill scream. Everyone turned to see Dorothy pointing at the tomb, her face pale with horror. "Look!" she stuttered. Everyone's eyes followed the indicated direction. There, partially hidden under the dog's paw, was a small shiny object. Lisa, careful not to startle the animal, reached out and picked up the item. It was a gold locket with the initials JS engraved on the front. When Lisa opened it, a small piece of paper fell to the ground. The silence that followed was deafening. Lisa unfolded the paper with trembling fingers, aware of the anxious look surrounding her. On it, written in hurried handwriting, was a message. "If anything happens to me, look in the old house on the hill. The truth can't stay buried." The dog, as if understanding the gravity of the moment, let out a low, melancholic howl. The revelation of the locket and the enigmatic message stirred Oakville like never before. Groups formed immediately, discussing in raised voices the meaning of those words. "What truth?" someone asked. "And what old house is that?" inquired another. Lisa, still petting the dog, looked at Mr. Johnson for answers. The old caretaker seemed to have aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. "The old house on the hill," he murmured, more to himself than to others. "No one's been there for years. They say it's haunted." Dorothy, recovered from the initial shock, was already in full form, spreading increasingly elaborate theories. "I always said there was something strange about that boy. Always alone, always writing in his notebooks. Who knows what secrets he was hiding?" While the excitement grew around her, Lisa remained focused on the dog. There was a connection between the animal and the unfolding mystery. Of that she was certain. But what? It was then that she noticed something strange. The dog, which until then had refused to leave the tomb, was now standing looking fixedly in the direction of the hill that rose beyond the cemetery limits. "He wants to show us something," Lisa said, her voice cutting through the buzz of conversations. Lisa's statement silenced everyone. The dog took a few hesitant steps away from the tomb, stopped and looked back, as if inviting them to follow. "We can't just follow a dog up the hill," protested Father Andrews, who had been observing everything in silence until then. But Lisa was already on her feet, determined. "I'm going," she declared. "Who's coming with me?" There was a moment of collective hesitation. Then, to everyone's surprise, Mr. Johnson stepped forward. "I'll go with you, miss. I know every inch of that hill." One by one, others joined. Mrs. Ethel with her slow but determined steps, young Charlie, the pharmacy assistant, eager for an adventure, and even Dorothy, unable to resist the prospect of being the first to uncover the secret. As the unusual group prepared for the journey up the hill, the rest of the town was buzzing with speculation. What would they find in the old house? What secrets had John Smith taken with him, and why had the dog chosen that moment to reveal the locket? As Lisa, the dog, and the others began their ascent, dark clouds were forming on the horizon, heralding a storm. The air was charged not only with moisture, but with expectation and apprehension. Oakville was about to face its own demons, long buried under layers of silence and conformity. And at the center of it all was a dog, a silent guardian, carrying the weight of a secret too big to be contained in a simple tomb. The climb up the hill proved more challenging than the group had initially imagined. The path, long abandoned, was covered with dense and treacherous vegetation. Mr. Johnson, with his years of experience, led the group using an old machete to clear the way through the underbrush. Lisa followed close behind, with the dog glued to her heels. The animal seemed to have found a new purpose, guiding them with an almost supernatural determination. Its amber eyes shone with an intelligence that went beyond animal instinct. "We're getting close, Mr. Johnson panted, pointing to a clearing ahead. "The old house is just over there." When they finally emerged from the vegetation, the group found themselves facing a vision that seemed straight out of a horror movie. The old house on the hill, once an imposing mansion, was now nothing more than a decaying carcass. Its windows, like empty eyes, stared at the newcomers with silent hostility. Dorothy, always dramatic, let out a little scream. "Oh my God, is this where we're going in?" "We have no choice," Lisa replied, her voice firm despite the tremor that ran through her body. "We came here for a reason." The dog, as if to emphasize Lisa's words, advanced towards the front door, its tail wagging for the first time since it had been found in the cemetery. Cautiously, the group approached the entrance. The door, swollen with moisture, yielded with an agonizing groan at Mr. Johnson's touch. The interior of the house was plunged into twilight, the air heavy with the smell of mold and long-kept secrets. "We need light," Charlie, the young pharmacy assistant, muttered, pulling out his cell phone to use as a flashlight. As they advanced through the living room, the beams of light revealed furniture covered with dusty sheets, like silent ghosts of a life that no longer existed. Portraits on the walls, almost unrecognizable under layers of dust, seemed to observe them with accusing eyes. The dog, however, didn't hesitate. With determined steps, it headed to a door at the back of the room, scratching it insistently. "He wants us to open it," Lisa said, approaching. The door led to an office. Unlike the rest of the house, this room seemed to have been used recently. There were marks in the dust on the desk, as if someone had been there, rummaging through papers. It was Mrs. Ethel who first noticed something strange. "Look," she said, pointing to one of the shelves. "There's something wrong with those books." Mr. Johnson approached, examining the shelf with experienced eyes. "They're not real books," he concluded after a moment. "It's a false door." Carefully, he pulled the shelf, revealing a secret passage. The group exchanged apprehensive looks before venturing down the hidden corridor. The tunnel was narrow and damp, the walls covered with cobwebs. After a few meters, they found themselves in a small underground room. In the center was a table with an old computer and piles of documents. "What is all this?" Charlie asked, his voice trembling slightly. Lisa approached the table, flipping through some of the papers. Her eyes widened as she read. They're records. Financial transactions, names, dates. My God, this is huge. The dog, which until then had guided them with such certainty, now seemed restless. It circled the room, sniffing every corner, as if looking for something specific. Dorothy, unable to contain her curiosity, picked up one of the documents. "Look at this, the mayor's name is here. And the police chief's." A heavy silence fell over the group. The implications of what they were seeing began to form in their minds. "John Smith discovered something," Mr. Johnson murmured, his voice loaded with belated understanding. "Something big and dangerous." At that moment, the dog barked, calling everyone's attention. It was standing in front of a small safe embedded in the wall, practically invisible under the layer of dust. Lisa knelt beside the animal, examining the safe. "We need to open this," she declared. "But how?" Mrs. Ethel asked. "We don't have the combination." It was then that Lisa had an idea. Taking the locket they had found in the cemetery, she examined it carefully. On the back, almost imperceptible, 3 numbers were engraved. With trembling hands, she turned the safe's dial, entering the combination. To everyone's relief and amazement, the door opened with a soft click. Inside the safe was a single item, a flash drive. Charlie, being the youngest and most technologically experienced of the group, took the flash drive and connected it to the old computer. The screen flickered to life. What they saw next made everyone hold their breath. There were files, hundreds of them, detailing a network of corruption that extended throughout the region. Politicians, businessmen, even judicial figures, all were implicated. John Smith was an investigative journalist, Lisa said, suddenly remembering something she had heard when she arrived in town. He must have discovered all this and... She didn't complete the sentence, but everyone understood. John Smith's fate suddenly became clear, and it was much darker than anyone could have imagined. The dog, as if sensing the weight of the revelation, let out a low, melancholic howl. Its work was done, its owner's secret finally revealed. As the group absorbed the shock of the discovery, a noise from upstairs made them freeze. Footsteps. Someone else was in the house. "We need to get out of here," Mr. Johnson whispered urgently, "and we need to decide what to do with this information." Lisa, with a determination that surprised even herself, took the flash drive and put it in her pocket. "We're going to take this to the state police," she declared. "This is a chance to clean up our town, to do justice." As they prepared to sneak out of the house, each member of the group knew that their lives would never be the same again. The secret that the cemetery guardian had helped unearth was about to shake the foundations of Oakville. And as they crept through the dense vegetation back to town, the sky finally opened up. The rain fell in torrents, as if nature itself wanted to wash away the sins so long hidden in that small Midwestern town. The rain fell mercilessly on Oakville, turning the dirt roads into treacherous, muddy tracks. The group, soaked and exhausted, made their way back to town with heavy hearts from the newly discovered revelations. The dog, now christened Guardian by Lisa, faithfully followed alongside them, as if still fulfilling a silent mission. As they reached the town square, they found an anxious crowd waiting for news. The storm hadn't been enough to disperse the curiosity of the residents. Inquisitive looks and agitated whispers greeted them. "What did you find up there?" someone shouted from the crowd. "Why did you take so long?" questioned another. Lisa exchanged worried glances with old Joe. They knew they couldn't reveal everything there, in the middle of the square. The information they carried was too dangerous. It was Father Thomas who stepped forward, his calm voice cutting through the crowd's murmur. "My dear friends, our companions have returned exhausted from their journey. Let them rest. Tomorrow, with God's blessing, we'll know more." The priest's words, though not fully satisfying the population's curiosity, were enough to calm the mood momentarily. The crowd began to disperse, shielding themselves from the rain that continued to fall. Lisa, seizing the moment, whispered to the group, "We need to meet in a safe place. We have a lot to discuss." Mrs. Wilson offered her house, a little away from the center. "No one will suspect a meeting at an old lady's house," she argued with a cunning smile. As they walked to Mrs. Wilson's house, Lisa couldn't help but notice furtive glances cast in her direction. News of their expedition to the hill must have already spread throughout the town. She pressed the pocket where she kept the flash drive, feeling the weight of the responsibility she carried. In Mrs. Wilson's cozy living room, the group could finally relax a bit. Guardian settled near the lit fireplace, his fur still damp from the rain. "What now?" asked Charlie, breaking the tense silence. "What do we do with this information?" Mary, always prone to drama, suggested, "We should go straight to television, expose everything." Old Joe shook his head, thoughtful. "We can't act hastily. These people involved are powerful. We need to be careful." Lisa, who had been silent until then, finally spoke. "I think we should contact the state police, but first, we need to make copies of these files. It's our only guarantee." Lisa's suggestion was met with nods of agreement. They knew they were dealing with something bigger than their everyday lives in Oakville. As they discussed the next steps, a noise in the street caught everyone's attention. From the sound, it seemed to be a car approaching, something unusual at that time of night, especially with that storm. Guardian stood up, his ears alert. A low growl escaped his throat. Mrs. Wilson approached the window, slightly pulling back the curtain. Her eyes widened in surprise. "It's the mayor's car," she whispered, alarmed. Panic set in among the group. Had they been discovered so quickly? "Quick," commanded old Joe. "Turn off the lights." In the dark, they heard the car stop in front of the house. Doors opened and closed. Heavy footsteps approached the door. Lisa felt her heart beating furiously. She clutched the flash drive tightly, as if her life depended on it. In a way, it did. 3 loud knocks on the door made everyone jump. "Mrs. Wilson," called a male voice. "It's me, Mayor Thompson. I need to speak with Miss Lisa. It's urgent." The group exchanged terrified looks. How did the mayor know Lisa was there? "Don't open it," whispered Charlie, his voice trembling with fear. But Mrs. Wilson, with a courage that surprised everyone, replied, "Just a moment, Mayor, I'll be right there." Before opening the door, she turned to the group and said in a low voice, "Remember, we don't know anything. We were just exploring an old house out of curiosity." With a final nod, she unlocked the door, revealing Mayor Thompson and 2 men who appeared to be his bodyguards. The rain continued to fall mercilessly outside. "Good evening, Mrs. Wilson," said the mayor, his voice strangely calm. "I hope I'm not disturbing, but I heard we had some brave explorers today. I'd like to know if they found anything interesting up there." The smile on the mayor's face didn't reach his eyes. There was a veiled threat in his words, a palpable tension in the air. Lisa stepped forward, trying to keep her voice steady. "Good evening, Mayor. It was just a curious outing. Unfortunately, we found nothing but dust and cobwebs." The mayor stared at her for a long moment, as if trying to read her soul. Guardian, sensing the tension, positioned himself protectively beside Lisa, a low growl escaping his throat. "I see," the mayor finally said. "Well, I'm glad everyone is all right. You know how dangerous those old houses can be. You never know what might come crashing down on our heads." The barely disguised threat hung in the air like a toxic miasma. The group remained silent, aware that every word could be a trap. "Well, I won't bother you any longer," concluded the mayor, his fake smile back on his face. "Have a good night. And remember, if you need anything at all, the mayor's office is always open." With that, he turned and left, his bodyguards following closely behind. The sound of the car driving away was met with collective sighs of relief. But everyone there knew this was just the beginning. The storm raging outside was nothing compared to the tempest approaching Oakville. The clock on the wall struck midnight. A new day was beginning, and with it a battle that would forever change the fate of that small town in the countryside. The day dawned in Oakville with a sky heavy with gray clouds, as if nature itself reflected the tension hanging over the town. In Mrs. Wilson's house, the group had spent the night on vigil, discussing in whispers their next steps. Lisa, with deep circles marking her young face, was the first to break the morning silence. "We need to act quickly. The mayor already knows we've discovered something, and it won't be long before he takes more drastic measures." Old Joe nodded gravely. "I agree, but we need to be smart. If we go straight to the state police, we might end up in even more trouble." It was at this moment that Charlie, who had been quiet most of the night, had an idea. What if we used the internet? We could create digital copies of the files and send them to trusted journalists across the country. Charlie's suggestion was met with a mixture of hope and apprehension. It was risky, but it could be their best chance of exposing the truth without putting their lives in immediate danger. "I'll need help with this," Charlie continued. "We need a secure computer and an internet connection that can't be traced back to us." Mary, surprising everyone, spoke up. "My nephew has one of those, what do you call it, VPNs. He always uses it when he comes to visit. Says it's to protect himself on the internet." The revelation that Mary had a tech-savvy relative drew tired smiles from the group. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. As Charlie began the upload process, Mary, who had been keeping watch by the window, let out a muffled cry. "There's movement outside. Cars from the mayor's office." Panic threatened to overtake the group, but Lisa kept her cool. "Continue with the upload. I'll distract them." Before anyone could protest, she went out the back door, Guardian faithfully by her side. Rounding the house, she came face to face with 3 official vehicles parked in front. Mayor Thompson was there, surrounded by menacing-looking men. "Ah, Miss Lisa," said the mayor, his smile not reaching his cold eyes. "What a coincidence to find you here. We were just looking for you." Lisa forced a smile, feeling Guardian tense beside her. "Mayor Thompson, what a surprise. Can I help you with something?" The mayor stepped forward, his voice dropping to a threatening tone. "I believe you have something that belongs to me. Something you found in the old house on the hill. It would be easier for everyone if you just handed it over." At that moment, Guardian let out a low growl, placing himself between Lisa and the mayor. The animal, always so gentle, now showed a ferocity that surprised everyone. "Control that mutt," shouted one of the mayor's men, taking a threatening step towards Guardian. It was at this instant that something unexpected happened. The sound of sirens began to echo down the street, growing louder and louder. State police cars appeared, turning the corner, their lights flashing frantically. The mayor's face visibly paled. "What is this? What have you done?" Lisa, as surprised as everyone, seized the moment of confusion. "It seems you have visitors, Mayor. Perhaps it's time to answer some questions." The next few minutes were a whirlwind of action. Police officers jumped out of their vehicles, weapons at the ready. The mayor and his men were quickly surrounded and disarmed. Across the street, Lisa saw familiar faces emerging from one of the police cars. They were journalists from major media outlets, cameras at the ready, capturing every moment of the unfolding events. It was then that she understood. The plan had worked. The information they had sent had reached the right places, triggering a chain reaction that now culminated in this moment of justice. As the mayor was taken into custody, protesting his innocence, the residents of Oakville began to come out of their houses, drawn by the commotion. Looks of confusion, surprise, and in some cases relief could be seen on their faces. Old Joe, Mrs. Wilson, Charlie, and Mary joined Lisa in the street, watching the scene with a mixture of shock and triumph. "We did it," whispered Charlie, still barely believing it. An officer approached the group, his countenance serious but respectful. "Are you responsible for sending us the information?" Lisa stepped forward, Guardian by her side. "Yes, sir, but the real hero is this dog. He led us to the truth." The officer looked at Guardian, a smile forming on his lips. "Then we have much to thank this brave four-legged friend for." As the police operation continued, with more arrests being made throughout the town, journalists approached the group, eager to hear their story. Lisa, feeling the weight of responsibility, began to narrate the events of the last few days, from the mystery of the dog in the cemetery to the discovery of the vast corruption network. As she spoke, she saw in the eyes of the people around her something that had long been absent in Oakville: hope. The truth, for so long buried, finally came to light, bringing with it the promise of a new beginning for the town. Guardian, as if understanding the magnitude of the moment, let out a long, melancholy howl. It was a sound of farewell, of mission accomplished. John could finally rest in peace, knowing that his sacrifice had not been in vain. As the sun set on the horizon, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink, Lisa knelt beside Guardian, hugging him tightly. "Thank you," she whispered in his ear. "Thank you for not giving up." The dog looked at her with his amber eyes, full of wisdom beyond human comprehension. At that moment, Lisa knew that no matter what the future held, Oakville would never be the same again. The truth, like the sun, always finds a way to shine, no matter how dense the clouds that try to obscure it. 6 months passed since that fateful afternoon when the truth came to light in Oakville. The small town, once suffocated by the weight of dark secrets, now breathed an air of renewal and hope. Lisa walked along the newly paved streets, Guardian faithfully trotting by her side. The changes were visible everywhere: building facades painted with vibrant colors, revitalized squares, and most importantly, smiling faces of the residents. As she passed by the town hall, now occupied by an interim administration until the next elections, Lisa couldn't help but smile. The sign at the entrance boasted the words, "Transparency and Honesty," Oakville's new motto. Her destination that sunny morning was the municipal cemetery. No longer a place of mystery and apprehension, the site had been transformed into a beautiful memorial garden. In the center, a newly inaugurated statue caught the eye, a bronze dog sitting in a vigilant pose, with a plaque at its feet that read, guardian, symbol of loyalty and justice. Lisa knelt before John's grave, now always adorned with fresh flowers brought by grateful residents. "We did it, John," she whispered. "Your fight wasn't in vain." Guardian, as if understanding the moment, let out a low, melancholy howl. Lisa hugged him, feeling a wave of emotion wash over her. The old dog, although still faithful and loving, showed signs of advanced age. His steps were slower, his fur grayer, but his amber eyes still shone with the same intensity. As they left the cemetery, Lisa and Guardian were greeted by various residents. The young veterinarian, once seen as an outsider, was now considered a local hero, but she knew that the true homage belonged to the faithful canine companion by her side. In the central square, a small crowd was gathering. It was the day of a session of the newly formed Oakville Truth and Transparency Commission. Created to thoroughly investigate the years of corruption and help the town heal, the commission had become a symbol of the new spirit that was taking over the place. Old Joe, now president of the commission, waved to Lisa as he saw her approach. The old cemetery caretaker had become a respected figure, his wisdom and integrity recognized by all. "Welcome, Lisa," he greeted her with a warm smile. "We were just talking about you." Intrigued, Lisa joined the group. It was then that Mrs. Wilson, with a mischievous gleam in her eyes, revealed the surprise. "Dear, we received a call from the state government this morning. They want to turn Oakville's story into an educational project, an example of how the courage of a few can change the destiny of many." Charlie, now responsible for implementing a digital transparency system at the town hall, added excitedly, "And that's not all. Several cities across the country are reaching out to us, wanting to learn from our experience. Oakville is becoming a model of renewal and ethics." Lisa was speechless, moved by the impact their actions had caused. It was Mary who broke the silence, her voice carrying a rare emotion. "You know, my dear, I've always been known as the town gossip, but now I understand the power that truth has. We no longer need whispers and rumors. We can speak openly, without fear." Mary's words touched everyone deeply. It was true. Oakville had freed itself not only from corruption, but also from the fear and distrust that had for so long poisoned the relationships between its inhabitants. As the meeting continued, discussing the next steps for the town's future, Lisa found herself reflecting on the incredible journey they had taken. It had all begun with a faithful dog, guarding a grave and a secret. And now here they were, rebuilding not just a town, but faith in humanity and justice. The sun was beginning to set when Lisa finally said goodbye to the group and began her walk back home. The streets of Oakville, once gloomy and full of secrets, now seemed to shine with their own light, reflecting the honesty and hope that had been restored. Arriving home, Lisa sat on the porch, Guardian lying at her feet. Together, they watched the first stars appear in the sky. The old dog let out a contented sigh as if knowing his mission was finally complete. Lisa stroked Guardian's head, feeling a deep gratitude. "Thank you, my friend," she whispered, "for teaching us the true meaning of loyalty and courage." That night, as Oakville slept under a starry sky, its inhabitants dreamed of a bright future, a future built on the foundations of truth, justice, and unity. And at the center of it all, the image of a faithful dog, guarding no longer a grave, but the renewed heart of an entire town.